Chapter 9. The Woman and the Lion. Denny, hey, how are you? Carl grinned broadly, thrusting out his hand. James, this is Dennis McGuffin, an old friend of mine from the past, when we went to college. Art college, in fact. And Denny, this is my son, James. Denny crouched slightly, winking at James. Not so old, eh, James? It's nice to meet you. I'm always delighted to see young people at an art exhibit like this. Denny, what are you doing here? I mean, I thought you were out west somewhere. I thought it was California, right? Denny nodded. Yes, that's right. I'm at the Getty now. Curator of drawings. The Dürer and the Bellini over here is ours. He gestured to a similar picture of a woman and a lion hanging next to the one they were staring at. It was the same size, but Marvin thought it seemed less delicate, the pen strokes thicker. Denny continued. We've got a number of items on loan for this exhibit, and I've been helping Miss Balcony with the arrangements. He beckoned to a woman who was skirting the crowd and walking in their direction, her gaze darting over the drawings. Marvin edged out from underneath James's collar. She was slim and tidy looking, her blouse tucked in, her honey-coloured hair drawn back in a neat bun. Black rectangular glasses sat firmly on her small nose, and he saw that she was pretty, but she had an unconscious manner of someone who was totally oblivious to the fact, which only made her seem prettier. Marvin liked her instantly. Christina, Denny called to her, come meet my friend Carl and his son James. You may have heard of Carl's work. In addition to being one of my favourite people, he is an excellent artist. Christina approached them smiling. Terry? No, I'm afraid not. My Freedom series was at the Steinhome last fall. Large abstracts. Marvin thought Carl sounded embarrassed but hopeful. Nope, doesn't ring a bell. Or maybe you saw my work at the Whitney? Christina shook her head again. But anything less than 400 years old is quite beyond my area of expertise. Expertise or interest? Carl asked, and Marvin was surprised to hear a note of irritation in his voice. Well, both, I suppose, she said, laughing. I'm sorry. Please don't take my ignorance as any sort of verdict on your work. I'm stuck in the late 1400s. Germany, Italy, Holland. Stuck in the late 1400s. The time of these drawings. Marvin couldn't even imagine how long ago that was. Impossibly ancient in Beatle terms. Christina took Carl's extended hand and gave James a wild smile. Do you like these? James nodded shyly. We do, Carl said, very much, especially the Dürers. Yes, they are lovely. He's our favourite, isn't he, Denny? Whenever one of his comes up for sale, we are always fighting over it. Extraordinary attention to detail and a flawless touch. You can really see it here. And she turned to James. I mean, if you compare the two drawings, they are the same image, but very different artists. Which one do you like better? James looked up at her, and then he pointed. This is the one I prefer. The Dürer. The Bellini was prettier in its way, but Marvin preferred the crisp, certain lines of the Dürer. And can I ask you why? Christina asked encouragingly. James bit his lip, too shy to answer. Bellini was a great Italian artist, she said. Dürer called him the best painter of them all. But he's not nearly as admired as the Dürer, Carl pointed out. Well, at the time he was. Now he's often overlooked in favour of the bigger names such as Michelangelo and Leonardo. Christina studied the two pictures, smiling faintly. Dürer went to Venice to learn from Bellini, but look at how different the pictures are. The best teachers are like that. They don't teach you how to do things exactly the way they do. They teach you how to be your best self. She pointed at the Bellini drawing. This one is gentle, all curves and shadings. The woman almost seems to be playing with the lion. Marvin could see what she meant. There was nothing particularly threatening about either the girl or the lion, even though the drawing was called Fortitude. Now look at the Dürer, Christina said. He tries to capture Bellini's idea of Italian beauty, but he can't do it. Dürer's girl is a German peasant, a real person. Look at her shoulders. They're as massive as the lion's. It will be a fight to the finish for sure. Denny laughed, and my money's on the girl. James nodded, half hidden beneath his collar, and Marvin did too. James likes to draw, Carl interjected. That's why we're here, actually. I gave him a pen and ink set for his birthday, and well, look, he came up with this. He held up the drawing for them to see, grinning. I still can't believe he did this. Christina Balcony stepped forward. Her whole face changed. The pleasant mask of politeness dropped away. She reached for the drawing. Your son drew this. Denny peered over her shoulder and sucked in his breath. Christina crouched next to James with the drawing between them. You made this? By yourself? James nodded, blushing. Were you tracing something? No, it's just a copy of what's outside my window at home. Christina straightened and held the drawing at arm's length next to the works on the wall. I mean, look at how similar it is to our Dürer miniature, the landscape here, she said to Denny. The execution. It really is uncanny. I know, said Carl. That's why we came. I told James this could have been done by a Renaissance master. Christina moved along the wall of pictures, still holding the sheet of paper. The line, it has the same detail. I wouldn't have thought it was possible. Marvin inched forward to hear her words more clearly. She's talking about my drawing, he thought with delight. She's comparing it to these famous pictures. Finally, she turned to them, her face flushed. James, she said, would you come with me? I want to show you something. Chapter 10, The Woman and the Sword. Marvin quickly ducked back under James's collar, worried about being seen. Christina's face was so close, her eyes fixed on James. James pressed against his father's leg. What? Where? Carl asked. Christina's gaze returned to the drawing. It's extraordinary. It's given me an idea. Denny raised an eyebrow. Her ideas are a little dangerous, he said to Carl and James. What are you talking about? Carl turned from one to the other. We're only here for a couple of hours. I have to get James home by 5 o'clock. Christina glanced around the gallery at the elderly couples and the guided tours murmuring past. It won't take long, she said, and Marvin thought her voice had a pleading note. I'd love it if you could come to my office. I want you to see something. Carl rested one large hand on James's back. But we've barely had a chance to look at the exhibit, he said. I know, Christina said apologetically. I won't monopolise your afternoon, I promise, but if you come with me, I can show you some of the other drawings. Some of the other Dürer drawings. Would you like that, James? I guess, he said, with a hesitant sound in his voice. He looked up at his father and Marvin could see Carl's impatience. I'm sorry, but I'd really like to take him around the exhibit. That's why we came. He took the drawing from Christina, who released it very reluctantly. And his mother will be upset if I don't get him home for dinner. Perhaps another time? Christina pursed her lips. It won't take long. Carl, you'll still have time for the exhibit. Denny, who had been standing nearby with a preoccupied expression, finally intervened. Carl, if you don't mind, it could be important. I ask you as a favour. Marvin saw that Carl and Christina were facing each other, equally irritated. Finally, Carl shrugged. Oh, fine, all right. I mean, I don't understand the urgency or the secrecy, but all right, whatever, James. James nodded his head and they followed Christina through the gallery to a plain wood door tucked away in the corner. Here, James asked, it's like a secret door. Christina smiled at him. This is the entrance to the drawing and prints department. Convenient, isn't it? I've got it, Denny said, pulling a small ring of keys from his pocket, and he winked at James. Full access for special friends of the museum. I'm trying to get a lot of use out of these before I have to give them back. He turned the knob and held the door open for Carl, James and Christina to enter. Marvin looked around in amazement. The nondescript door opened into a large study lined with bookshelves. There were doors and hallways opening off it, all hidden behind the wall of the gallery. How long are you here for, Denny? Carl asked. Just a couple of weeks and then I have to get back to the Getty. I won't be sorry to leave this cold weather for my California sunshine, I can tell you that. Christina's balcony office was at the very end of the long corridor. It was a large room with windows overlooking Central Park and floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with books, probably fat and dusted volumes of art history. There were a few battered wooden chairs around a long table. She indicated to them with one hand while she retrieved a big book from her desk. James, his father and Denny sat down and waited. Christina balanced the book awkwardly in the crook of her arm and thumbed through the pages to a glossy reproduction of a pen and ink drawing. She set it down in front of James. It's another Dürer, just like the Fortitude drawing. This one is called Justice. Marvin, still trying to shield himself from sight, could see that the drawing was similar to the drawing of the girl with the lion. The same small size, maybe 3 or 4 inches square, same colour ink, same impossible level of detail. But this image was of a woman in a long flowing gown, with a sword in one hand and a set of scales in the other. Her body was half turned towards the viewer, and she gazed sadly past him, the scales raised, the sword heavy at her side. Is this the same girl as the one with the lion? James asked. No, Christina said. Look at her face. Dürer's people are always so real, each one distinct, but they share the same kind of melancholy. What's melancholy? James asked. Sadness, Carl answered, watching Christina. A kind of sorrow. Why are they sad? James asked. Marvin thought they did look a little sad, but it was more than that. They looked as if they were deep inside themselves, thinking private thoughts. Christina lifted her shoulders. Who knows, really? I mean, he didn't, as an artist, have a happy life. His marriage was difficult. His wife had a bad temper and cared mostly about money. He threw himself into art as a way to escape that. Marvin thought Dürer's wife sounded a little like Mrs. Popperday. But he believed in beauty, Denny added. He once said, "What beauty is, I know not, though it adheres to many things." Dürer believed art was a way to find beauty in the most extraordinary aspects of life. Like your drawing, James, Carl said gently, taking that ordinary scene outside your window and turning it into something beautiful. James blushed, his freckles dark on his cheeks, but his face filled with a shy smile. Christina continued to stare at the drawing. Like any artist, Dürer put his life everywhere into his work. These drawings were a response to his own sadness and loneliness. Carl frowned. That's quite an assumption to make. Christina raised an eyebrow. Assumption? We know a lot about his life from his letters. I don't doubt it, but you're assuming that his drawings are about his own life. The sadness you could see could be deliberate choice for this picture, something that Dürer wanted to say about justice. Marvin looked from one to another. What were they now going on about? James's even-tempered father suddenly seemed annoyed. Christina dismissed the comment, turning to James. Whatever the reason, there's always this intense, lower, lonely quality in Dürer's art. Do you see it? Marvin wanted a closer look at the drawing. There was something powerful about that picture, but also something held back. Justice. This picture wasn't with the others, James said. No, it wasn't. Christina exchanged a glance with Denny. Carl checked his watch. Is that it then? Is this all you wanted to show us? Christina's brow furrowed. What I wanted to show you, James, yes. Marvin looked at them in bewilderment. He'd never seen Carl show such dislike for someone, and it seemed fully reciprocated. Christina crouched next to the table, her pretty face eye level with James's. James, have you ever tried to copy something? Just the way you copied the scene outside your window, but not a scene, a drawing. You mean like trace it? James asked. Not tracing, copying the image yourself just by studying the artist's lines. No, James said. Well, I mean, sometimes with cartoons. His voice trailed off. Do you think you could try it with a Dürer drawing? James looked puzzled. This one? No, Christina said quickly. Not this one. The one from Denny's museum that's hanging in the gallery. Fortitude. What are you talking about? Carl interrupted. What would be the point of that? And he turned from Christina to Denny. Denny himself looked unsure. You want him to copy Fortitude? Why? I don't know, Christina said softly. It's probably hopeless. I just thought we'd see if we could make a good likeness of it. What? Now? Here? Carl shook his head. I told you, we've just come to see the exhibit. We don't have time for James to start sketching things. James had a panic-stricken look on his face, and Marvin could feel him trembling. All my drawing stuff is at home. Christina straightened, resting her slender hand on the edge of the table. That's okay. If you'd prefer to take a copy of it home with you, that's fine. And she flipped a page of the book. Look, here it is, right after the Justice picture. You could take the whole book. If you don't mind, James, I'd love to see if you could do it. She hesitated, still watching James. Nobody looked closely at the world as Dürer. Nobody cared as much about capturing its smallest details. Your drawing has the same sensibility. Marvin felt his heart swell. Carl shook his head. Dürer can't compare to Leonardo or Michelangelo. Christina tilted her head, considering. No, not in the emotional force of drawings. He didn't have their originality and vision. He's a quieter artist, but in sheer patience. She hesitated. Yes, Denny echoed firmly, in his faith that beauty reveals itself layer upon layer in the smallest moments. Well, there's no one like him. In truth, beauty, and in beauty, truth. Christina reached her hand across the table and gently turned the pages back to the drawing Justice. Denny slapped James's shoulder. So what do you say, James? I'm not exactly sure what our mysterious Miss Balcony is planning, but want to give it a try? Marvin couldn't take his eyes off the drawing. The strong, solitary woman with her sword at the side and the brass scales dangling from one hand. He wanted to draw like this. He wanted to be inside the head of Dürer, adding each particular detail, getting closer and closer to the truth. But he knew what his parents would say. He knew what his entire family would say. It was dangerous, ridiculous even. But more than anything, he wanted James to say yes. I don't know, James said. I don't know if I can. Will you try? Christina's gaze was steady. Please. James looked up at her, biting his lip. Okay, he said finally. Oh, James, thank you. She bent quickly and hugged him. Just for a moment, her glossy golden head dipped close to Marvin, and he could smell the clean, warm scent of her skin. Then she gasped, "Oh my